Mexico recently for a research trip?
Yeah, this summer, our department took some students from the Department of Marital and Family Therapy, art therapists, to Mexico. We were in San Miguel de Allende, and it was an amazing experience. They were graduate students, art therapists, that we brought and met up with Mexican art therapists and had a really meaningful exchange. They learned about each other, they learned about identity and how to work in different environments, and yeah, it was cool.
Wow. So how long was that retreat? Was that
2 weeks. The first week, the students took 2 classes, and then the second week, we put together some workshops for the community.
so is that a global practice, would you say, art therapy? Because I mean, to me that is something that I haven't heard of before. It seems like I mean, I'm just not as familiar with the world of therapy, but
Okay.
you know, it's I feel like it's a different dynamic than the traditional. When I think of therapy, I think of me and, you know, a therapist in like a comfy room, like, you know, a bunch of cushions everywhere.
Let me tell you about art therapy. Art therapy is an amazing discipline. And what we do is, you know, instead of traditional talk therapy, we use creative arts, art making as a form of expression, but we also use it in a directive. So like, you know, let's say for instance, you know, you're in my office and we're having a session. I might ask you to draw a picture to express how you feel. I might ask you to use different art materials to create a representation of an experience that you had. I use art therapy with couples, with families, and so it's like a third language in a sense, but it's another way of expressing yourself outside of words.
Yeah, it's definitely creative expression is like super cathartic in a lot of different ways, but I would imagine if it's led by a professional that it would be a lot easier to get somebody into like a very comfortable, open, almost like, you know, what they draw is interpretive, right, or interpretable. Is it kind of like a 2-part thing, like they draw something and express themselves in a certain way, and then you kind of talk with them about maybe what it meant or what it might be an indication of or something like that?
Well, actually, I don't interpret the art, so it's not like, you know, I'm a what do you call those? What do you call those people who look at something and what do you call those people? Those like fortune tellers. I'm not a fortune teller.
Okay.
So basically, you know, they draw it, and it's really collaborative. So it's really a way for them to express themselves, right? And then we'll look together, and the individual or the family will explain and explore whatever metaphors come up, whatever symbols. I mean, there's so many different ways to use the art materials to express, and some of it could be cathartic. It's not always cathartic, right? There's also just a way to release and express and tell a story. So we integrate the art making and the art exploration and the use of material in a really intentional way to help the therapeutic process.
Got it. So I wanna definitely get more into that. But for people who, you know, who are watching this, like our audience, who might not know who you are, maybe tell us a little bit more about, you know, who you are, maybe where you grew up, so we can get to know you as a person, where you got your degrees, or, you know, and then what you do for work. We just talked a little bit about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm Dr. Joyce Yip Green, and I teach in the Marital and Family Therapy with specialized training in art therapy department at Loyola Marymount University. I'm an assistant professor. I've been teaching as an assistant professor for them going into my 3rd year. And I also direct the Research Institute, and I'm editing the Journal of Clinical Art Therapy out of our department. So that's my job as the professor. And I also hold a private practice, and I see individuals, couples, and families in private practice as a licensed marriage and family therapist, and also as a psychological associate.
And you've been doing your private practice now for how
wow.
long?
Yeah. Now, yeah, you're going to date me here. I've been practicing for over 25 years.
25 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Seeing specifically couples in relationship counseling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a specialization in infant, family, early childhood mental health. And so, I've worked with babies and their parents, and I actually worked on a lot of projects and initiatives in LA County on pregnant moms and how to support individuals or families with young children, 0 to 5.
That reminds me of one of our first episodes there's a nonprofit in LA called Families in Schools. We talked to Yoli Flores, who's now I think the president and CEO of the company.
Amazing. I've worked on projects with Yoli.
You have?
Yeah.
Wow. LA is a small world.
She's amazing.
It's not as big as I thought it was when I first moved here.
She's a powerhouse.
She definitely is. She definitely is. So yeah, and I was just speaking to the point of, how important early parenthood, child development, education, how important that is, and how important it is that parents are like a united front when it comes to raising a child. It's I haven't done it yet. It seems it's like a daunting task. I don't want to think about it yet. But.
Yeah, well, it all starts in early childhood, right? The experiences that you have in early childhood set you up for your adulthood. And a lot of the experiences, especially I've been finding in the work that I do with adults, is it can be traced back to their early years, when they were an infant, when they were a young child, before age 7. And a lot of times that shapes their future success, maybe, or, because a lot that happens in childhood affects how your brain develops.
For sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I used to work for an organization called 0 to 3, and they do a lot of work and research and advocacy for babies and toddlers.
Because it's more than just your identity, right, and your personal narrative. Obviously, that develops later in adolescence and things like that. But, your subconscious programming, the way we function is, just deeper than we can understand about ourselves, right? It happens at that early stage.
Well, I have to say, you made a comment that it starts in adolescent, but I want to say that it starts even earlier than that. Because the way that we form secure attachments with other people starts with the early attachments with our caregiver, right? So, I don't know if you know anything about attachment theory or
I don't. I've been
attachment styles and
looking
things like that.
into it, but
okay. So, the way that we can attach as adults is influenced by the way that we were. The attachment that we had with our caregivers when we were infants. So let's say if there was, some disruption or trauma, or if there was a disruption in that bond, that mother-child bond, or that, not even necessarily mothers, right? It could be whichever significant caregiver took care of you as a baby. If there's been a disruption, it affects how safe and secure you feel as a person.
You did a lot of work with this kind of like attachments types in your PhD, correct?
Oh, yeah. So
which is
I,
sort of
I
why I wanted to definitely talk more about, your, where, like, how you ended up on the career path that you did.
hmm yeah, I'm
Maybe
jumping ahead. All
where,
right.
well, that always happens.
Yeah,
That
right.
always happens. And
Yeah.
then, so that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, so I guess I should mention that I got my PhD in international psychology, and I did my dissertation work in Rwanda. And there I interviewed about 50 Rwandan mothers of babies ages 0 to 1. And there I really was interested in cultural ways of parenting, right? Specifically attachment. So, like in the United States, we really teach parents, when they're working with their babies, to do tummy time, to build up muscles and all that, and face-to-face contact. That's really important. Um, I was really curious about whether or not that was something that Rwandan mothers or caregivers valued. And so, yeah, I did my research there and interviewed 25 mothers in the rural areas and 25 mothers in the city, and did a comparison. And it was really interesting what we found.
Between the differences between the rural mothers and the.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Actually, there was just a slight difference between the rural and the urban, more urban. But I mean, in reality, in Rwanda, it's mostly rural, right? Just slight variations, but
I can imagine that's like a different world, right? It's not technically classified as a first world country, right?
right, yeah, there's a lot of poverty
Yeah,
in Rwanda. They've been impacted by the genocide,
right.
so the genocide against the Tutsi, and so there's been a lot of nationally in their entire country, a lot of violence and trauma. And so I didn't specifically examine the effect of genocide on their parenting, but that kind of came out in some ways. But mainly what I really was curious about is, what do they value? What are their goals for their babies, and whether or not there was a focus on individualism or collectivism, right?
And what did you
Individual growth
right,
versus collectivist.
right.
And it was really interesting because what we discovered is that it's kind of a hybrid. So the mothers were really focused on helping their children and their babies develop self-control. So a focus on their individual development so that they can be peaceful citizens, right? To benefit the society. So that really came through in both environments.
So would that be a collectivist
Mm-hmm.
point of
Yes.
view or goal for
Right.
for their parenting style?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. In America, I would assume it's the opposite.
It's pretty, yeah. We would say that in America, the focus is very much on individualism, but there's variations, right, depending on your cultural values and your cultural beliefs. Not cultural beliefs, but on your culture, right?
Like the structure of the political economy, everything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Because culture is not just about ethnicity, right? It's about where you came from. It's about history. It's about politics, and so there's a theory that I think you and I talked about a little bit. We alluded to it, but there's the ecological systems theory, right? Bronfenbrenner, and that talks about how development of an individual is dependent not just on their individual biology, but it also is influenced by their parents, their family, their neighborhood, and their society. So you're looking at it from an ecological framework, and And development is influenced, again, not just by your biology and not by genetics, but how you're raised, how you're taught, and what's happening in your environment. So, like, a lot of us, we all are coming out of, or we're still in a pandemic, but that affects our development, right? Because it influences how, again, back to attachment theory, how safe and secure we feel. Because I believe that safety and security and that feeling and that experience of nurturing from an adult figure really does shape our ability to have intimate relationships in adulthood.
I'm only just now beginning to scratch the surface of how those dynamics differ from nation to nation, right? A little bit about me, I'm going to, live for the first time in another country for like more than a couple months this September. Yeah. And so I'm going to experience what it's like to live, first in a European country and then in an Asian country for a few months. And so I think I might be able to get a sense of how culturally, like, the norms are completely different, right? And how, when it comes to something as important as raising kids, it's like something that's maybe considered healthy or normative or recommended in America it's not so in another part of the world, whether that's Europe, Africa, Asia, the Middle East, right? Anywhere. It could be, it's different from place to place. And so you talk about like what makes like a healthy relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, is that even a legitimate question, or is it like what makes a healthy relationship from a Western perspective? Or, are there things that you look for when, you sit down and talk to couples, from your background? I don't know if people know, do you come at things from a global perspective, or do you come at things from a Western perspective?
Oh, that's such a great question. That's actually something I've been exploring because, it's just to let you know a little bit about my background. I was born in Laos, and my family came over when I was 2 years old when the communists took over Laos. So Laos is like a small country in Southeast Asia. And during that time, my family, mainly my parents and myself and my younger brother, we had to leave like pretty immediately because the communists were planning to take over the country. Right. And so that experience of displacement, right, for my family, it's something that brought us to the United States, right? And when I was younger, I didn't really quite understand what was happening because I was 2, but I'm beginning to now learn about and understand that experience of, what a refugee experiences during that time, coming from Laos specifically. And I have to say that feeling of one, coming to a new country and then trying to adapt to, different customs, and talking to my parents about it. I've been learning so much about how they had to adapt. And
learning a new language, right? Or did they know English?
Everything.
Or
my dad did, because he learned some English when he was in college.
Because I don't think they don't speak Mandarin in Laos, right? They speak Laotian.
No, they speak Lao. Yeah.
Yeah,
Laotian. Yeah, exactly. And so, my mom had to learn English. My dad had to, beef up his English skills, and then when I came over, I had to learn the language along with my brother. Yeah. So, the experiences that a family, especially when they're immigrating or acculturating, but also fleeing another country, right? That sense of stress, right? So we talk about stress. Raises the cortisol levels. It could affect, development, that feeling of safety, security,
For sure. For sure. I can only imagine. I mean, so you are able to, it's your expertise is kind of like a lot of it was given to you, it sounds like, by just way of your life experiences, and it made you able to maybe access a couple at a deeper level, specifically maybe immigrant couples who are coming over from, your life story. It's like, it's more than just being born and raised in America. It's of
look at history,
experiencing, I think I'm not exactly sure when you came over, but it sounds like it may have been like when the communists tried to take over. Was that late, like Vietnam War? So was that like in the 80s sometimes? 70s. Yeah. So, that's like a crazy time in America, socially, even in just America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And so growing up, growing up as like immigrant refugees, is that, do you identify kind of as one? What was that like? Was that like?
Yeah, it was an adjustment, but it's what I knew, and luckily we had a community, right? A community that my parents found other Lao people to find support. Social supports are so important to help families, and so the way that I work with my immigrant clients, or with anybody actually, is really paying attention to culture, which is, I think, the question you were alluding to, is like, is culture a part of the work that I do? And it's foundational, right? Because culture is part of what shapes our identities. You're talking about, visiting other countries, and that is your interaction with other cultures, and that will shape you, right, as you also experience the different cultures.
Right. You can speak to so many different kinds of American experiences, right? So when a couple comes into your office, into your practice, how do you go about kind of analyzing them, or figuring out how healthy they are? Or...
Yeah. Well, usually when a couple comes in for counseling, there's usually a problem that they're wanting to address. Whether it's, it could be anything, right? It could be they're fighting a lot. Maybe there's just a lot of differences between them related to child rearing. That could be one. It could be, somebody had an affair and they're trying to, work through that. It could be that there's no connection and they're feeling like they're not sure if they should stay together. So a lot of times couples come into my office because there's a problem they want to address. So primarily I want to, the first question I always ask is, tell me about your love story, because a lot of times couples have forgotten about it, right? Especially when they're in my office for the first time. They're in conflict. Maybe they, have been fighting. They haven't been talking to each other for the last, 6 to 9 months. And so then I ask them to tell me how they met, how they fell in love, what was the thing about each other that they fell in love with, and it kind of brings it back to the point when they attach to each other. And that to me is really important, because I want to know and understand what drew you to the other person. What was the point where you fell in love, and remind them and bring that to the table.
Do you incorporate, actual like demographics, history, like cultural context, because you're an international psychologist, right? So is there anything different you do in that sense about, okay, maybe one, like these two people are from completely different cultures and they maybe don't see where the communication impasse is or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, everybody has their own unique culture, right? Even if they're the same ethnicity. So they might have parents who raised them with certain customs, beliefs, values that might be different from another person.
Right.
And so helping them to identify what are those expectations. How were you raised when you were younger, and how did your parents raise you, or what are you familiar with? Like sometimes one person might not be used to the conflict, right, or feel very uncomfortable with conflict because in their house their parents never fought, or maybe in their house it was a single parent, whereas in another household it was very much they came from a big family, and there's always yelling and very loud in the family. And so it's helping them to understand how that has affected the way they communicate, how they relate, how they understand the other person's intention through communication. So we look at communication styles and cultural norms and cultural expectations, because I think that really does play a part in it. But also, what was it like in their families when they were growing up?
You get to know them individually? Like, do you do any like personality stuff with them? Like, do you Myers-Briggs them like a regular therapist, or is it totally different from?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the Myers-Briggs. I mean, what you're referring to as the Myers-Briggs, like as a personality, right? So we talk about personality in general. I like to use love language assessment. Do you know about the love
I have
language?
no idea what that is. No,
Okay.
I would like to though.
5 love languages: physical touch, gifts, acts of service, words of affirmation, and quality time. So a lot of times people, they receive love in any of those 5 ways, or I mean, we use all 5 of those, right? But some feel it more than others, right? So some people might really feel loved by a hug. Others would rather receive a gift, So understanding those preferences for how they show love and how they receive love can also be really important. But I think personality does have a lot to do with it, because if you don't understand your partner's personality, then you might miss what they need, right? So we also look at needs. Right. Needs and expectations.
So that whole time you could have been, I don't know, buying them flowers, and it would have done this huge thing for them that giving them a kiss on the cheek never really would have, or...
Exactly.
Interesting. Is there any connection between that and like attachment style, or and how do you kind of tap into that?
Yeah, I mean, as I'm getting to know the couple, I'm learning about them, right? And as I'm learning about them, they're sharing that with each other. And then we use the art to continue to solidify that, right? So I love art therapy with couples, because they actually create things together, and through that I can observe and they can experience their communication, right? I'll have them do an art directive non-verbally, right? So they have to draw on a piece of paper, maybe using 2 different colored markers, and they have to almost like read each other's body language, right? And they create a picture together. And then I'll ask them to draw another picture, but now they can talk about it, right? They can kind of plan together. And so I observe, and in that assessment, I learn a lot about their personality, their communication style, the way they organize, maybe their executive functioning,
For sure.
And it's really interesting. And then we talk about it. We talk about the experience. We talk about what it was like. How did they feel when their partner, said this or did that, and their reaction to it. A lot of couples therapy is really about giving them space to sit together and have a dedicated time to focus on each other. I feel like in our previous conversations, you had asked me, like, what is it about, like, what is it that couples need? Like, what is the magic? Like, what is couples therapy? What does it do, right? And I really do think that it forces us to slow down and pay attention to each other. Because, I mean, in this world right now, there's so much information. We're so distracted by social media, by, you know, every shiny thing, that we don't actually spend time together to really pay attention and attune to each other.
You mentioned you work with like babies and mothers, right? Do you ever have younger like clients, or
Oh yeah, I see, like, from age.
Gen Z, Gen X?
Oh
any of
yeah,
those?
yeah, the whole lifespan. Yeah.
Really? And well, couples, or is that just
Yeah, couples too. Yeah,
serious?
couples. I've worked with teenage couples.
Wow.
I mean, not married, but they're dating,
Of
and
course,
they
yeah.
were having conflict, and
And does that, have you noticed any key differences between maybe like couples from different generations or from younger generations? I mean, I could talk all day about why I'm asking that question, like online dating,
Right,
and
right. Oh my
know,
gosh. Yeah.
like the Tinder Hinge era, and how
Oh,
that's affecting
yeah,
dating
yeah.
and things like that.
A lot of ghosting, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
breaking up over text, that happens.
Yep.
Or, you think things are going well, and the next minute they're not returning your calls, they're not returning your texts, they've just dropped off the face of the earth. Or you think you're dating, and then all of a sudden on their, dating profile, you're blocked. It's like, right, without any explanation. So I think there's more ways now to, there's more, well, I think we, as a society, there's so many options, right? Especially with these apps, and then with social media. There's so many options that I think sometimes people have decision fatigue. They can't make a decision. Are they gonna miss out on the one if they're not sure this person's the one? So then they want to kind of leave room for another person, right? So that decision fatigue, or that hesitancy to commit, I've also seen that.
well, yeah, I mean, I think that this is like getting to the root of the whole kind of like that the whole issue is, right, like what I've sort of been hearing about, you as a couples therapist, like you advocate communication, and like if two people, want to make it work, there is work in a relationship, but everything
Yeah.
that,
In the best relationships, there's work.
right.
Right. And I think sometimes there's that fantasy that, once you are with somebody, it should be perfect. There should be like birds chirping all the time, and it's always happy. But that's how growth happens, right? Even as individuals, right? When we can work through something, that feeling of working through is so amazing, that I have seen couples even more in love after they've worked through a really, really difficult time in their relationship. And that is why I do what I do, to see that moment where they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm more in love with you now than I've ever than I was. And this is after like affairs, and maybe one person got pregnant with another, anyway.
No, that's heavy.
That's heavy, and I've worked with couples like that too, and it's not easy, but if you're able to get through that together, then it. And sometimes it's, you have to decide for yourself if you feel like you're willing to work that hard.
So do you have sort of like any big picture takeaways about, what men need or what women need in relationships that, are sort of these like foundations that are kind of like regardless of any demographic, or just what people need in relationships?
And I would say, as humans, right? As humans, we all want to be seen. We all want to be acknowledged and understood. And I think I have found that in the couples that I've worked with, that if they're able to begin seeing each other, understanding each other, and acknowledging each other, that really goes a long way. And a lot of times things just kind of fall into place. Now, of course, if there's like some really deep stuff, and sometimes there's individual mental illness, right, or mental health challenges in one person or the other, then that's, but I think I think it applies still. Being understood, being seen, and acknowledged.
What do you sort of make of online dating? Do you think that it's going to change the way like dynamics work in the future with dating? Do you have any kind of do you have an opinion on it?
Oh, I've actually seen a lot of success. A lot of people I know have found their life partner through online dating. And, some of them are better than others, where they do a really good match, based on common interests or whatever. But I think where it becomes a challenge is if the person or the individual is not being honest with themselves as to their level of readiness for commitment. So sometimes people think that they're ready to commit, but they're still kind of figuring themselves out. And so they don't really know what they need or want. But they're just kind of, they're just kind of feeling it out. I'm not really sure what I want, so they want to date multiple people. But they're not being honest about it. And so then they're trying to convince the other person that they're ready for a commitment when they're really not. And then that causes problems and.
For sure. For sure. Well, I mean, and I think just speaking from, experiences with like friends and just personally, yeah, I mean, it usually, as far as I've seen, it usually boils down to sex, right? When you're young, it's like you don't have your entire life together and you don't necessarily know what you need emotionally, like from a nurturing, or you might...
That development, right? So you have to also... So you asked me earlier, is there a difference between like younger couples versus older couples? And I think you have to also consider developmental stage, right? And that's when I talk about readiness to commit. You have to understand what you need and what you want for your development at that time, right? And to be honest with yourself and be honest with the person that you're wanting to date.
I think a lot of people, that's one of those tough conversations, though. I think a lot of people probably find it really hard to admit that they're just looking for sex with somebody. Or that they want to date multiple people, right? That's like the hardest conversation to have because, you might end up hurting this person's feelings, or you don't. It's that resistance to kind of sit down with somebody and have a tough conversation.
Yeah, because then you're not being honest, right?
Right.
And you're not entering the relationship with authenticity. And I think that also causes a lot of problems in couples.
Yeah.
Because one person or both people aren't being authentic or real or honest with what they really want. And they're trying to convince the other person to stay, right? And so they're telling them what they think they want to hear in order to keep getting what they want. Yeah, so. Wow. So there's that too.
Did you find that that you had to do have you had to do work, like internal work on yourself over the years?
Oh yeah.
And for people out there who might be like looking to do that, because I know that there are a lot of us like my age, how did you end up kind of like on that journey, or how did you kind of start to reshape your perspective or things that you may have mistaken or assumed about relationships and love, and kind of just like reform your perspective on it?
I think again it's being open to self-reflection, right? Really think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what's important to you, what's not important to you. Learn from your mistakes, be open to making mistakes, but being open to change. And I mean, I think it all goes back to self-reflection and self-awareness. So people find it through different ways, you know. I mean, I have a spiritual practice, so faith is really important to me, and so I pray, and reflect and journal, and I've seen my own therapist. I talk to friends. I talk to my husband. So there's so many different ways to reach that self-reflection and self-awareness. You just have to find it. Yeah.
Doctor, thank you so much for coming on the
Thank
podcast.
you.